Have you been following the post-launch cycle of Civilization 7? Let me get you caught up. It's good now. Supposedly. I don't know, maybe that's something you want to believe. But it's been a year since it came out, and things have changed. On release, the game was in a shameful state. I didn't even think it was worth my time to do a proper review, but now it has reached a state where it can be played as a respectable, finished product. It's not crashing, there are no random bugged ghost units haunting your tiles, and you can finally play a map size bigger than standard. They also have the Transformative Test of Time update coming out soon. At this point, if you would like to buy it and just want permission, I give you that. Feel free. This is a reasonable AAA strategy game. Just one that made some questionable pivots. It's not to my taste, but if it improves enough, I could see a world where it overtakes Civ 2 or Civ 5 in my personal preference order for the series. But I have my doubts. I've gone through interviews and the dev diaries, and I've tried to make sense of the bigger picture of Civilization 7. I want to talk about the concrete ways in which having a cohesive identity makes a game better. And I want to make sense of Firaxis' vision for this game, and how much they've tangled themselves up in knots trying to make sense of this project post-launch. A tempting option when trying to understand the position that Civ 7 is currently in would be to compare it to Europa Universalis 5. Both titles are epic AAA strategy games from blockbuster franchises. Both have had unusually long development cycles, but still released with a ton of problems, bugs, and poorly thought out game systems. Both have late games that feel motionless or the same every time. One has a Civ switching mechanic akin to disappointing 4X game Humankind, while the other has a good production mechanic akin to disappointing 4X game Era History Untold. Both games have staunch defenders, but many fans see them as tedious and half-baked. Fans in both communities believe that it could easily be several years before they reach anything close to being comparable in quality to their predecessors. But despite all those similarities, Europa Universalis 5 has significantly better Steam reviews, 75% positive compared to 50% positive, and while EU5's player count risks falling below EU4, Civ 7's player count is only about a quarter of Civilization 6. Where is this discrepancy coming from? There is one crucial difference here. All of Europa Universalis 5's failures were in service of a noble goal: giving fans what they want. EU4 was an incredibly popular game, but there was some criticism around it. It was too board gamey, with reliance on abstractions like mana and development. EU5 is committed, maybe not to realism, but to more concrete systems and more detail, with hourly ticks and 4 times as many provinces. The game itself might be disappointing, but the disappointing elements weren't related to the vision from the developers. We can put this on a chart. In the bottom right, we have games that did something entirely different, but well, like Super Mario 64 being almost a sandbox game where you jump into paintings. I don't think anyone was asking for that. On the flip side, you have the thanks I hate it games, like Europa Universalis 5. In the bottom left, we have the category that Civilization 7 falls into. The best point of comparison for Civilization 7 is Shadow the Hedgehog.
Who was asking for this game?
For 326 possible story paths. Yeah, let's have a spin-off for the edgelord antagonist from the Gotta Go Fast games, who now shoots guns and has to find that damn 4th Chaos Emerald. This is the game that Civilization 7 most resembles. This is meant to be derogative, but I also loved this game when it came out, so take that as you will. But no one remembers the potentially good ideas here. In the first 2 Sonic Adventure games, people loved playing as Sonic and Shadow, but they were criticized for having too many levels where you play as other characters, hunting for emeralds or piloting one of Eggman's mechs. That's not the case here. This is 100% Hedgehog feat. I cannot believe I left that in the script. Ugh. Anyway, nobody remembers the novel systems or real problems that it attempted to solve. They remember it as the game that nobody asked for that was not executed particularly well. And for Shadow the Hedgehog, that's how things will stay. But for Civ, there is one redeeming factor here. Shadow the Hedgehog was shipped as a finished game. The development cycle on Civilization 7 is not over. It will likely still become a better game. They could improve the execution, making their cornerstone systems function better. They could try to change the vision of the game to be more in line with what fans wanted. Or they could try to do both. Let's take a look at how they've been shaping the future of the game since release. They've added the ability to cut back the age resets when progressing to the next era. Legacy paths and victory conditions are both heavily reworked. I have to imagine that they're doing something to the crisis system. And with the new Test of Time patch, they're planning to give players the ability to disable civ switching. So they're redesigning or walking back a lot of the game's signature features. So which of these paths does that mean that they're choosing? It's not path number 2. Notice how they're trying to make the game more things to more people? So they're changing things, right? They're giving us what we want? Well, they're also not really pursuing option number 1. They're working on a collapse mode for age transitions, doubling down on their initial system, and there's evidence they're also working on a 4th era. And when they do walk back their changes, they're doing so as a choice, an option that you can turn on and off in the menu. This leads me to believe that they're going with the 3rd option, but this is a trap. Efforts to reach both of these goals crowd each other out, and will leave the game in this weird limbo state without any defined purpose or vision. Yes, to see into the future of Civ 7, we must, to paraphrase George H.W. Bush, understand the vision thing. What is the importance of audience expectations and the identity of a game? And why is it important for the designers of media properties to present a singular vision? So let's start with that. What is Civilization 7's vision? And what is its identity? During the development of Civilization 7, it's clear that the designers were intent on taking things in an unfamiliar direction. A particularly interesting story has circulated that a lead developer came back from an ayahuasca trip, wanting to completely remake the game. Now, to be clear, aside from one guy on Glassdoor, there is absolutely no reason to believe that this is true.
No, not this time. It's totally made up. Pure fiction.
I'm mentioning it because it is really funny. Although the fact that you could believe it says something about the state of the game. No, it doesn't. Jokes aside, the developers wisely shied away from telling fans that they were planning to make more changes than earlier games in the franchise had. By this point, Sid Meier's 1/3 rule was firmly established, and so regardless of their intent, they were bound to use it to sell the changes they wanted to make. But the developers have occasionally come clean and implied that they wanted to change more than previous titles. According to Dennis Shirk, we introduced all these great new mechanics because we wanted to give our players something new to chew on, because they had something very similar from 4 or 5 to 6. In the FGS Gamescom 2024 interview, he also stated that he wanted to focus on unpredictability, that he wanted to do things that the fans wouldn't see coming. But whether or not they saw transformative change as part of their vision, we can, at the very least, say that they were committed to a particular set of changes to their systems, and that these systems are a core part of the game's identity. The way that they were talking about the Aegis system, they knew it would be a big shakeup. They say that building Civilization 7 with Aegis as our core concept has completely shifted how we approach making a Civ game. They compare it to breaking the wheel. They were not talking the same way about military commanders, for example. This ties in with another key focus that comes up in a lot of interviews and marketing material, and that is reconsidering the game's relationship with how it portrays history. The Aegis system, civ switching, independent powers, and narrative events are the related game mechanics here. Reading the dev diaries and interviews, the one other thing that stands out to me is that they reference a lot of problems in the series, and hype up their new systems as a way to solve these problems. So, eliminating workers and reworking how tile yields and cities function was intended to reduce late-game fatigue and busy work. The Aegis system was also intended to fix late-game problems. They even bring up Carpets of Doom when discussing the commander system, even though the traffic jam experience is virtually the same once you unpack your units. So, this is the identity for Civilization 7 that they propose to us. A few specific, large, cornerstone systematic changes, and using these changes to fix ongoing problems in the franchise and realign Civ's relationship with history. These changes included eliminating workers and completely reworking what a tile does, and changes to the story, the theme, and the feel of a playthrough, with age transitions, distant lands, and civ switching. Quests and narrative events too, but I'm not going to count them as transformative change because they pretty much already existed in Civilization 4. Like, in Civ 7 they have more flavor text, but I'm here to lead, I'm not here to read. I cannot stress this enough. These changes that they have made place the game firmly in this corner right here. They were both transformative and poorly thought out. I did a whole video on the late game problem in Civilization. I hadn't played Civilization much at that time, so I was pretty conservative with my criticism. I said that the age transitions amounted to chopping the unpopular endgame up and distributing it earlier on like it was some sort of side grade. Having now played the game a bit more, I'd say that this change is very clearly bad. Building up and snowballing is the best part of Civilization. Pursuing victory conditions is the worst part. In Civilization 7, you spend a lot more time pursuing victory conditions, and you spend less time building up and snowballing because the power of your nation is more tied to pursuing these goals, and because you know that your progress is just going to get reset. Ed Beach said that he wanted to bottle up the fun and spread it throughout the game. Instead, they got their hands dripping wet with the worst parts of the game and wiped their paws across the canvas. The tedium of the victory condition now permeates and leaves its stench throughout every single era. It also just puts you on edge. Like, a narrative event will give you +1 food in your capital, or a technology will give you a bonus yield on a building, where you can't tell if that building's ageless or not because that information is not in the Civilopedia for some reason. And so you just don't know, is this a permanent bonus or one that goes away very soon? This sense of uncertainty lingers over the many decisions that you make. I'm constantly wondering whether the yields that I have will be taken away from me. And if I put in the work and learned the answer, it might not be the same answer 6 months from now. Distant Lands is still an awful system. I'd been told that the map generation was fixed, but that's only true for the new map types. A year after release, on Fractal, I'm still getting this 5-3 setup with a really telegraphed vertical line of islands between the two. The Distant Lands system seems to be what's holding them back from fixing this, and in interviews they've confirmed that the new gameplay rules are the cause. I've played the Shattered Seas map type too. By the way, it has its own issues. I don't even know why they added Distant Lands at all. Civ 6 already had the continent system and unique sets of luxuries on each one. I think the treasure system would have converted fine if they just used that template. This problem seems completely self-inflicted. Finally, another big cornerstone change was Civ switching. I think on a gameplay level, this is fine. I like how they gave you little missions that allow you the choice of another Civ in the next era. But the community has been clear about their feelings here. At best, it made diplomacy confusing, and at worst, it made things feel less like a Civ game, and the promised narrative payoff just wasn't really there.
I also think they kinda got greedy here. There just simply weren't enough civs on launch. Yes, history is multicultural, and empires build on the ruins of the great powers who came before, but they didn't have enough factions to tell a realistic story for the roleplay fans who care about that sort of thing. Too many were walled off and released as DLC. These are the 10 ancient era factions at launch. Which of them is supposed to logically lead into the Normans, Siam, or the Songhai? Throw in leaders who aren't from any of the nations that you can choose, and it's just too much.
Transformative changes like these were intended to be Civilization 7's identity. Now, they are big problems. And if they fix these problems, or remove these systems, the game would lose its identity. I realize that for people who enjoy the game, this criticism can seem a bit disingenuous. Critics of the game got what they wanted, right? Core systems are being reworked or made optional. If this doesn't satisfy them, was it ever possible to win them over? Or were we just complaining in bad faith because we wanted to see the game fail? Identity is a bit of a nebulous concept too, so using it as the next line in your Mott and Bailey defense seems exasperating. But this is a serious concern moving forward. Pivoting in the way that they've pivoted comes with a lot of different issues. So, what are these potential pitfalls? The first is causing downstream effects with game balance. I'll give you a couple examples of this. In Civilization 3, the culture flip mechanic was unpopular at times, so an option was added to disable this feature. But nothing else has changed. Religious and scientific civs both have cheap culture buildings, and this power isn't really as useful with culture flips turned off. AI programming has also not been adjusted. It's much easier to win with culture flips off because your computer rivals still heavily prioritize culture buildings.
In Civilization 4, a lot of top-level players prefer to play with goody huts turned off. This has had the downstream effect of making hunting bad as a starting tech, messing with the civ balance. It also makes exploration not very useful. The best use of a scout is parking it in a corner to stop barbarians from spawning nearby. The magnitudes of the changes from Civilization 7 are much bigger than the examples I just gave, so there's a high potential for a domino-style effect where changing these systems has a lot of cascading impacts. At launch, if you had a big army, you would lose most of it when the age rollover happened. Giving the option of softer age resets could make military-focused strategies too powerful, for example. Options are problematic like that. It is understood, for example, that on island maps, seafaring civs will be powerful, and on Pangea maps, they will be weak. It is assumed that a continent's map or a fractal map is what the game is balanced around. And if you play on other map types, some wonders, pantheons, city-state bonuses, etc., are going to be kind of useless. But with civ switching, this will be taken to an extreme. Take Iceland, for example. Literally all of their listed bonuses are tied to units, buildings, wonders, and game mechanics that only appear in the Age of Exploration. I guess maybe these policies from their custom civics tree would apply to other eras, although naval units seem to be a lot less important in the Age of Antiquity. You can find the details of their plan here. It has a lot going on because they have a lot to compensate for, and I'm not convinced that this is the best use of their time. Some parts, like their syncretism system, seem like civ switching with extra steps. Others feel like giving the civs a proper kit for each era, using leader attributes, kind of like Civ 4 and 3, so they will effectively be balancing two systems at once. The question is, would they prioritize balancing the rest of the game around the civ switching option, or would they prioritize this new system where you can play the same civ the whole game? The same way that naval leaders in Civ 6 are not balanced around Pangea maps, Civ 7 needs to choose if it will be balanced around civ switching, no civ switching, or whether they're going to put in great effort to balance for both. So, at this point you see, the identity of the game actually is quite important because it informs the choices that they make with this type of decision. The same applies to the crisis system, era resets, victory conditions, and other unpopular systems. The designers need to make the call. Are they going to balance around the settings that correspond with their original vision of the game, or are they going to abandon that vision and balance around something more akin to the older Civ titles? With this in mind, remember that Civ 7 has recently made softer era resets to be a default setting. And sensibly, they've done the same with continents and islands as a map type. This is consequential. When you're setting up a new game, you are presented with a selection of settings that should be guaranteed to lead to a good, balanced match that is kind of like the platonic ideal of what the game has to offer. I think a good comparison would be a Lego set. Technically, you could just take the pieces and make whatever you want. So why do we need instructions? Why do we need a picture of a castle on the box? Well, players need to be shown how to play. They need to get a feel for what the different pieces can do or represent before they feel empowered to make stuff on their own. Changing the default settings is like changing the instructions. Hard to do without making big changes to the pieces available inside the set. And if the set is a computer game, then changing the pieces, so the gameplay and the code, can be very time-consuming and expensive. So, the identity of the game and the vision of its creators matter because they determine the default settings. Default settings show people how the game is supposed to be fun. The identity of the game also matters because it dictates what kind of play experience the balance of the game should be prioritized around, because you cannot balance the game around 40 different possible combinations of settings. But there are still even more reasons why the identity of a game is valuable. There is a bug that exists in Super Mario World where, if you enter a prohibitively specific series of inputs, you can achieve arbitrary code execution. So, you can use your controller to write whatever code that you want. Speedrunners use this to skip to the credits and beat the game, but if you wanted, you could program the game to do whatever you want. It could use the assets in the cartridge and run Snake or Pong. A game can be many things to many people. Our play experiences are not the same, and yet when we talk about video games, we need to find common ground. For reviews of a consumer product or critiques of a piece of art, we need to be on the same page. When we review Super Mario World, do we also need to review Pong? Can I really say that StarCraft 2 is my favorite game if all I play are custom matches modded to be an imitation of Mafia? Games need to have an identity for us to talk about them, a cultural understanding that guides the developers as they rework the systems and release DLC. Being a sandbox where you can do whatever you want
is a valid identity, but that's not what Civilization 7 is at all. It's nowhere near as flexible as, say, the modding scene for Civilization 4. In Civ 7, there are a few cool, unique features that people don't talk about much. You're tied down to a bunch of clunky systems, and then some of those systems can be turned off in ways that may or may not be less clunky. There's nothing that it adds up to. I don't really know how to talk about this game because I don't think this game knows what it's trying to be. We have the dev diaries, but they're filled with false assumptions, or the devs are moving now in a different direction, or they just don't line up with our experiences playing the game. If you cannot talk about Civilization 7 as the manifestation of a creative vision, then you can only talk about it as a fiasco. It just feels like they're throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks, which is normally okay, but here they're wasting valuable development time, because the game is also just generally poorly made in ways unrelated to its big experimental choices or creative vision. If they were just focused on improving the quality of the execution, they could maybe get it to what I'm going to call the Star Fox Adventures zone. But there is one big change, one cornerstone idea that they cannot make optional. Its impact is huge, and they can't wiggle their way out of it. So, in a roundabout way, it's probably the game's definitive feature. I'm referring to the removal of builders and the changes to how tile yields function. Full disclosure, I am just a hater with a capital H when it comes to this change, and it doesn't make any sense to me why they did it. If their vision was redefining the game's relationship with history, this has nothing to do with that. If their intended identity for Civilization 7 was making big changes to fix the problems from earlier entries in the series, let me state unequivocally that this doesn't fix shit. In Civ 7, every time your city grows, you get a pop-up asking you to assign your citizen. One citizen, one game action. In Civilization 6, each citizen works a tile that you should probably improve with a builder. One citizen, one game action. Nothing has changed. No time is saved. They blew up the core foundation of how cities work at a granular level, claiming they wanted to reduce micromanagement, and then they didn't actually reduce micromanagement. In case you're doubting me here, I'll note that in Civ 6 you have some extra actions. You can work a tile twice if there's a feature that you need to clear, like chopping a forest. But in Civ 7, you would probably need to move a citizen again if you placed a building on top of it. You also get a pop-up to manually assign specialists in Civ 7, whereas specialists in Civ 6 are typically just assigned automatically and don't require you to use a builder to improve the tile. So again, I don't think that it has any meaningful impact on reducing micromanagement. I suppose that in Civ 6 you can reassign your citizens, but that was always optional and never took up too much of your time. You could argue that the goal is to remove builders and reduce map clutter and traffic jams, but they could also just turn off 1 unit per tile for builders. God knows that they have no issue doing this with other non-combat units in Civ 7. The biggest reduction of micromanagement comes from the new town system, which has nothing to do with builders or the rework of how tiles function. So I don't think that we can say that the tile rework actually reduces micromanagement. Add this to the pile of evidence why big dramatic changes for their own sake was probably the actual vision that they were aiming for here. I think it would be a good idea at this point to look at the different paths that Civilization has as options to move forward. Let's start with the pivot. It is very difficult to think of a successful title that pivoted away from its core vision after its launch. The only example I can think of would be Fortnite. It started as a cooperative looter shooter before the release of its iconic Battle Royale mode. I don't think that this offers a realistic template that Civ 7 could follow. Fortnite Battle Royale was intended as a live service experience, allowing for frequent patches and updates. And they immediately caught lightning in a bottle with a very fun game that players loved. Even then, they still had downstream issues from this pivot. The original vision of the game, which was single player, hinged heavily on its build mode. But this eventually created an imposingly high skill ceiling in multiplayer. All the sweats cranking 90s in their mom's basement made it hard for new players interested in casual play, and eventually they had to fork the game and create a zero build mode. Civ 7 will have to deal with these downstream problems too. None of their game modes will have the instant appeal and popularity of Fortnite Battle Royale, and they just don't have the resources they need to do everything that they want to do. They couldn't even fulfill their intention of delivering Hot Seat as a game mode. So it's not a realistic option for the game to reconstruct itself to be more in line with the expectation of fans, while also dramatically improving in quality. Every time you make changes to the big systems, there are downstream effects. You move 2 steps forward and 2 back.
At the same time, the original systems that the game was founded upon are flawed. Even people who genuinely like Civ 7 don't like the legacy paths or have issues with how the era resets play out. Polishing these systems up will run into diminishing returns before this becomes a truly great game. And then there's the vision thing. A few things stood out from their interviews and dev diaries. All of them were either misguided to begin with, or are now being made optional by the recent round of changes. This is a ship without a sail, and I don't think that there's an easy solution here. If the game sticks with its current systems, its appeal is very niche. If it pivots to more familiar systems, there is too much that needs to be done to get things where they need to be. This is a game that is not good, and I don't believe that it will get much better. Alright, that's everything for today. If you have a dog, you should pet your dog. He's a good boy and he deserves it. Take care, everybody.